Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about the total cryptocurrency market capitalization and the idea that time is still on our side. If you guys like the content, please subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. Also, check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. We often say things on the channel like time is on our side. We'll give out warnings sometimes when things can get heated in the short term, but if you look at the entire market cycle, so far it would appear to me that time is still very much on our side. Now, this might just look like the price of Bitcoin. However, it's not. This is the total cryptocurrency market capitalization for the last decade, so it's a lot of data. The idea behind this is to get a fair value fit. Now, unlike a lot of the other regression lines that we draw on the channel, which is fit to quote-unquote non-bubble data, the red line is fit to all data, in fact. So the red line is what I would refer to for the entire market capitalization as our fair value. Now, there's going to be some people that might misinterpret what I mean when I say the fair value. It does not mean we're going to immediately go back to it. We've spent years above the fair value line. We spent years above it over here, and even in the bear market, we spent years above it until finally we came back down below it. So we know that the fair value is more or less a guide to determine levels of overvaluation and undervaluation. So according to this fit, there's key areas of undervaluation, which represent our key accumulation phases. And then there's periods of overvaluation where we have a bull market and you can make a lot of money, right? Because things are trending up. But the advantage will always go, in my opinion, to the people that were accumulating down here before the bull market took place. So in the future, you know, I get a lot of people saying things like they can't wait for the next accumulation phase. I'll tell you one thing. It's a lot easier to say that than to live through it, because when we're actually in the accumulation phase, it can be somewhat disheartening sometimes when you're accumulating for a year or two and then you think it's going to break out and then it sort of just like crushes you back down. But you sort of have to just stay disciplined and recognize that, you know, you're fighting the fight. You got to stay disciplined, and eventually it will work out as long as you're picking cryptocurrencies that will trend up with the market. Now, what I find a lot of people thinking is that, okay, well, you know, certain altcoins haven't gone up to their prior all-time highs, therefore they're just waiting for them to do that and go into price discovery. The downside is that there are a lot of cryptocurrencies that will not make it to their prior all-time highs. There were a lot of cryptocurrencies that had major moves in 2013 that didn't do anything in 2017. There are a lot of coins that moved in 2017 and early 2018 that won't do anything this bull market. So that's something to take into consideration, and this is why we spend a lot of time on the channel talking about picking racehorses and trying to get rid of the donkeys that you have in this cryptocurrency ROI race. So from here, what I would like to say is you can tell that currently our market capitalization of the entire cryptocurrency asset class is a modest 1.65 trillion. Our trend line is coming in hot at approximately 571 billion. This puts us at an overvaluation of approximately 186%. Now that might seem like a lot, but the next chart will show just how much room we could still have to move up for this market cycle. So I recently have put out videos that give the indication that we could be in for a pullback in the next few weeks or maybe in the next few months. But even if that were to happen, it doesn't necessarily imply that it's the end of the market cycle. One way that I might assume it could be the end of the market cycle is if we're able to come all the way back up here to this long-term macro trend line down. Now, the uncertainty with this trend line is fairly high. It is only 3 data points. So we have to keep that in mind. It's only fit to 3 data points, not 4, not 5, only 3. There's going to be some uncertainty in that line because we only have, as I said, 3 data points. So give it some wiggle room up here. Now, you might say, well, Ben, you just said 186%. But to me, this looks like it's over 200%. The reason why it looks like that is because I've shifted it so that I can easily show the undervaluation on this same logarithmic scale. Okay, so if it's below 100%, it's undervalued, and above 100, it's overvalued. So at 100% represents at the fair value. Okay, so when the white line is on the red line, we're at the fair value. That represents right at 100%. Okay, so this space right here is the reason why I think that for cryptocurrency, Bitcoin and altcoins, time is on our side, because we still have, in my opinion, a long ways to go. Now, that doesn't mean there will not be corrections along the way. A lot of these corrections will wipe a lot of people out. One of the most common questions I get on the channel is, well, hey, Ben, I just FOMO'd into Bitcoin or Ethereum at the prior top, and it just retraced by 30 or 40% or something. Bitcoin hasn't retraced by 40% recently, but this is a common question, right? It just retraced 25 to 30%. I put in more than I could afford to lose, and now I'm down 30%. This is a hard position to be in, right? Because you're FOMOing in at the worst possible time. And this is why it's so important to try to be that smart money coming in over here when we're in the undervaluation phase. However, we do not have a time machine. We cannot take everyone back in time who's buying now. So the implication now is that if you're still moving into the market, which I know a lot of people are, if you're still DCAing into the market, you have to be prepared for short-term pullbacks, recognizing that at the end of the day, time is still on our side. I mean, it's not financial advice. Of course, anything could happen. But looking at this chart would imply to me that there still is a lot of upside potential. Now, partially to close this gap, I think Bitcoin's going to have to go to $100,000. Okay, like I don't think that altcoins by themselves will be able to close this gap. I think a $100,000 Bitcoin, maybe between 1 to 200K this market cycle, will help close this gap, and then altcoins will do the rest, is my opinion as to how this will ultimately play out. But something I've discussed before, and I want to provide an update to. There's a lot of similarities, and there still seem to be a lot of similarities between this cycle and 2 cycles ago. Okay, not this last one, but 2 cycles ago. Look at the similarities between moving down into the fair value or undervaluation region, and then back up, another capitulation down, back up to just poke our head above the fair value. Same thing over here, and then one more capitulation before we have liftoff. And if you notice, what happened next for this cycle is that we actually had a double peak. So the first peak took us up to a ridiculous level of overvaluation very, very quickly. We had a cool down phase, and then we blasted back off later. So we might assume that there could be something similar to happen this cycle, where maybe we have a major move to the upside. We already are, right? But I mean, if it could go even higher potentially. It comes up, and then maybe it comes back down, and then goes back up later on to put in a final cycle peak. This is one consideration that I think we need to at least discuss, because a double cycle or a double peak cycle would be somewhat scary, because it would likely seem that this would be the peak. Imagine if it comes up here and then we see like a 60% correction or something. For a lot of people, they might assume that that would be the peak of the cycle. However, we recognize that there's no guarantees of anything, because this peak and this peak happened within the same year. They were both in 2013. So this is why I want to keep reiterating, because I feel like there will be a correction at some point in the next few months, and it's going to be more than just a 25% correction. And it's going to scare a lot of people. It's going to send a lot of people running for the hills. There's going to be people that are overexposed in the market, and I don't know how they're going to react. But what I can say is that when you look at this chart, and again, it's a model. All models are wrong. Some are useful. If you look at this chart, it would lead us to believe that in terms of the entire cryptocurrency asset class, time is still on our side. If you look at our current level of overvaluation, we're actually near an area last cycle where we had a 40% correction. However, we also had 40% corrections before this last cycle, before this level, and we still haven't really had that this cycle quite yet, at least not in the price of Bitcoin. So one potential outcome, probably the most simplest outcome to understand, would be just going straight to the top. Okay, and that would basically just look like this. We just continue to go straight to the top. If it continues going at this pace, it could happen by the summer of 2021. If we were to continue moving up this quickly, right, where Bitcoin goes on a run, it pulls back a little bit, consolidates, altcoins make their moves. We just keep rinsing and repeating this cycle. If we do that a few more times, there's a good chance we'll be at this peak line, and that might only take a few more months if we continue to increase at this rate. Another possibility would be a double peak cycle, where you have something like what happened over here happening again. And this could look something like this, where maybe we have a blow off top. Maybe Bitcoin goes to like 80K, 90K, maybe 100K, maybe even higher, and then has a substantial pullback, maybe even more than 50%. Maybe it breaks the 20-week moving average. This one broke the 20-week moving average over here for Bitcoin. Maybe it breaks the 20-week moving average briefly, and then later goes on to put in a final cycle peak, 6 to 12 months later, which is similar to what happened over here. So we want to keep that in mind as well, because we don't want to discount anything. What I've always said with this cycle is that it will have its own characteristics, and it will be different than every cycle before it. Okay, it simply will be different. It's not like we can look at any prior cycle and know exactly what's going to happen, but we can look at prior cycles to understand what can theoretically happen, therefore be prepared for anything. For instance, if we only ever saw this cycle, we might assume, oh, well, it should be a fairly smooth run up. However, by looking 2 cycles ago, you could see, well, we've had times where we had a double peak cycle and had a fairly sizable correction, but that didn't stop us from picking ourselves up by our bootstraps and continuing on. Another possibility would maybe we'll look at this like a triple peak cycle. Now, I don't know if anyone's going to buy this move right here was a first peak in 2019, but if something like this happens, you might consider it to be a triple peak cycle where we have a sort of like a more impulsive move really early on in the cycle, more like a fake out, a capitulation, and then a new peak that represents us going to higher levels of valuation than we've ever gone before, because this one hadn't in terms of where we were on the regression band, and then maybe a final cycle peak later on that takes us even higher, and then maybe going back into a bear market. So there's a lot of different considerations here, and I think that one of the things that it's easy to do, and I'm guilty of this myself, is assuming we know exactly what will happen and when it will happen. I think to some degree a more pragmatic approach would be to let's see how it plays out. Okay, right now, all I can say is that according to this model, even if we have a correction, it still appears that time is on our side. The January correction is barely even noticeable on this. The February correction is hardly even noticeable. We haven't really had a sizable correction like this one or this one. Not yet this cycle. And so we might not have a 40% correction like last cycle. I mean, it could just be 20 to 30% corrections until we get to a local top or a global top or market cycle top. Of course, that's theoretically possible. But the thing I want people to take away from this, not something you can take to the bank, it's not financial advice, but the thing that I would like people to take away is that according to this model, there is still room for potential upside in the cryptocurrency asset class. Doesn't really matter what happens in the short term, but looking at the macro scale, we still have a ways to go. Which brings me to my last point. And this is a serious point because we discuss this every time we do a video looking at this type of analysis. And that is, as we go to sleep at night, some of you guys are already rolling your eyes, right? As we go to sleep at night and we look at the total cryptocurrency market cap, and we know that it could go up to 10 trillion potentially, okay? Could potentially go to 10 trillion this market cycle. We're currently not even at 2 trillion. Now, I think it's more likely to go to 10 trillion if it happens later on. You can see that each peak is getting closer to the green band, and this one's actually coming up right on top of it, so I would expect this one to come in underneath it. If we were to go up relatively quickly, rather than waiting at all, then we might peak out sooner, maybe closer to 5 to 7 trillion. If we continue on for a while longer and can move up in this region over here, then I think there's a more realistic opportunity or a little more realistic chance for the entire market capitalization as a whole to go to approximately $10 trillion, plus or minus a few trillion. So the point that I was making is that as we go to sleep at night and we think about the entire cryptocurrency market capitalization, recognizing that it could go to 10 trillion, plus or minus a few trillion, we can't help but think, what's a few trillion among friends? Thank you guys for tuning in. Please subscribe to the channel. Check out the premium list. You can find a link to the altcoin season sale in the description below. We'll leave that open for about 5 more days if you want to lock in the lower rate. Subscribe to the channel. Let's go for 200,000 subscribers. We're almost there. We're putting in around 10,000 subscribers a day at this point. It's insane growth. So subscribe to the channel. Give the video a thumbs up. Turn on alerts to the channel so you're notified of future videos. Make sure you turn on all alerts. Check out the Telegram channel. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.